Hey everyone, we'll be doing a Facebook Live shortly. Hopefully everyone can see this. Hopefully you're enjoying the rain today. It's definitely something we've needed for a long time. So let's see, I'm looking at my timekeeper and I've got about 3 minutes till we actually start my book talk about Susan Orlean's The Library Book. But until that time, I'm just going to make sure that, everything's in one piece here in the home studio. Trying to brighten things up with a little bit of color today. I was a little concerned that I wouldn't have enough light because I'm depending upon a giant picture window to help me out here. So hang loose for a second and we'll be live. If you have any questions, feel free to email us, ask a librarian, or any other route that you might get in touch with us here at the library. Because of course this might not be live when you see it, but we're paying attention and we definitely want to hear your comments. So yeah, this is the book I'm going to be talking about shortly. Hopefully everybody is seeing it correctly. Last week I think everything was backwards. So, timekeeping. You know what? What's really cool is I have a lot of people that help us get through this experience, as I hope everybody at home is teaming up, helping those kids keep their education and their reading going. Those teachers that are out there working overtime to make sure the online delivery is the best they can make it. And everybody in between who's doing the best they can and looking forward to a time when we can all see each other in person. Cool. All right. I've got 1 more minute before we officially start, and we got to be punctual if nothing else. So we got several people on our library team watching to make sure keeping me in line. And in a moment or two, we'll start off. Gonna check my notes here for a second. Using my favorite cup, donated to me by someone close in the library. This is my contact with the office. Hey, Zach. I see you there. According to my timepiece, I definitely see that it's 3 o'clock, which means it's time for Facebook Live with Harold. And I'm going to talk for just a little bit about one of my favorite books. It's a piece of nonfiction, which should come as no surprise that anybody knows me well because I'm all about the nonfiction. I do like a good story and a good piece of fiction, but there's so many stories out there in the real world that it's really hard to get past those to the stories that come from people's imagination. But what I love most are like the stories that read like nonfiction novels, like I mentioned last week, Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, or the stories of a woman named Susan Orlean, who's really good at taking really esoteric, obscure, idiosyncratic topics and putting them in a story that keeps you reading to the very end. So today's April 15th, 2020. A lot of people used to know it as tax day. This year we got a delay, thank goodness. A shout out to my friend Terry. It's her birthday. It's a big one this year. And as probably a lot of you did this morning, you got up, got your coffee, logged on to the internet to read the news or social media. And some of you might have noted that today is the year anniversary of the Great Fire at the Cathedral of Notre in Paris, which was a pretty overwhelming day worldwide. I've never been to the Notre Dame Cathedral. I think a lot of people haven't, but we still felt like it was a personal experience because it's part of our history and culture of this, civilization we're a part of. And then it made me think, of course, the Great Fire of Alexandria. We hear about the Library of Alexandria that, a couple thousand years ago was the great repository of all great knowledge and great writers and great thinkers at the time. Yet there's a lot of debate about, did that actually happen? Was there a Great Fire? Was the library so awesome? Well, here's a fire that a lot of people never hear about that really happened, and that would be the Los Angeles Public Library fire that happened. It started on April 20... Oops, I gotta connect my notes. April 29th. It's important that I keep my timeline straight. April 29th, 1986. A fire broke out at the Los Angeles Public Library. a lot of people, even people who live in Los Angeles, didn't really hear about it. It didn't make the news as big as one might suspect such a great institution in a big modern city would make. Because just a few days before, on April 26th, something else happened that definitely took over the media stream. And that was the meltdown at the nuclear power plant in Chernobyl, which was a big deal. Nobody will argue that. But of course, as a result of that, the Los Angeles fire was much more of a local story than it might have been at any other time. So, Susan Orlean, you might know her if you're fans of the film adaptation, which was based upon her book, The Orchid Thief, which is, the film and the book are very different. They're a great illustration of taking a very hard to adapt book and make it into something that's your own, because how else are you going to be able to make a movie out of it? Story for another day. And Susan Orlean is a great writer of what I like to say, the story, taking obscure information, facts, and idiosyncratic topics and bringing it together. And she always wanted to write a book about the library because she had such a fond memory of her childhood experience in the library. She talks about how she and her mother would go to the library together, and once they got inside, even at the age of 5, those were different days back then, she and her mom would split off and go to their own departments. And it was one of the first times in her life that she was allowed her own independent meandering through some place that she could call her own. So, of course, when she had this experience once again with her own child, she thought, this is a story someone should tell. But she didn't really know that it was her to tell the story, or how you even tell such a story and bring it together. I think if any of you have seen the movie The Public, directed by Emilio Estevez, you'll see it's a big story, and it's hard to bring together because there's so many characters, because it's everybody. And then one day, not too long after she moved to Los Angeles, she had she went to the Los Angeles Public Library to take a tour, and as she was wandering through the library, the gentleman who was leading her on her tour actually stopped, grabbed one of the books, took a big deep whiff of the book, like so many people love that library smell, and then he remarked, "Wow, sometimes you can still smell the fire." And of course she had no idea what she was talking about. And she asked him, "What fire?" And pardon the pun, that moment is what sparked the writing of the library book by Susan Orlean. I'm going to move it a little closer to make sure you can see it. And this book is constructed in such a cool way. And I can tell you right now, one of the things that's really interesting to me about this book is that this is one of the books. We have a committee that met recently for St. John's Reads. It's our big month-long community reading book program. Happens every February. We just did it before. We ended with a big 5K run up in Nocatee, and every year we do our best to put together really cool programming about a book, influenced by a book, to bring people together, because that's what books do. So if you have any ideas, make sure and contact us. But this is one of the books in consideration. And I personally am already wanting to advocate for this book, but I've got to read all of them, so it's going to take some time before I can come up with that. This book is really a detective story. It's a storyteller's, paradise. There's characters in this story that it could only happen in Los Angeles. There's the young man named Harry Peak, who is an underemployed actor, claims to have been in a lot of movies, but you can't find any Harry Peak in IMDb. And then you have a gentleman named Charles Loomis, who was the first city editor of the LA Times, who went on to be the city librarian who ran the place way back in the day. Both of them are people who love to tell stories, and these books are full of them. And as the author would say, that this book is an example of, you take the Venn diagram that takes people who live in Los Angeles and people who work in libraries, and what you get in the middle is a perfect meeting of people with a higher likelihood of being unusual. And that's what makes for a really interesting story. It's a timeline of events. The book itself is a really cool. She didn't want a dust jacket on the book. You're used to going to the library and grabbing a book that has plastic wrap around it because there's a paper dust jacket. She didn't want that because she didn't want a single thing to come between the reader and the book. Even if you look at the spine, it's kind of hard to, let's see, there we go. See where it says the library book? That is actually an iconic image of the Central Tower of the Los Angeles Public Library, which was built in the 1920s. So it's a really good example of 1920s urban architecture. There is, in the back of the book, there is a book pocket. There's a picture of Orleans herself. And then there is a book pocket for the real due date card. Behind it is an image of an old-fashioned book pocket with cards. And on the names on that card, this is something we don't do anymore because we don't tell everybody who's checked out what. She's listed herself. She's listed a couple of other people. She's listed Ray Bradbury. And then usually on the inside of the dust jacket, you have a little write-up about what the book is, and that's been printed right on the book itself. So it's really cool that she's constructed this book in such a way that it's definitely not only a story about an event that happened, it's an homage to books, and it's a real love letter to libraries itself. It's really cool. What I like, too, is that each chapter, let's see if I can find a quick example. I should have marked this off. Each chapter, right at the top of the page here, whoops, this is definitely testing my coordination. Anyway, at the top of each chapter, she has several titles that are either directly or loosely connected to the theme of the chapter, and includes the author's information and the Dewey Decimal System. Another little homage to how we operate, and in case people are wondering, we still use the Dewey Decimal System. Absolutely. We make it easier for you folks, hopefully, but it works for us really well. So, the story of the library book. This is a story of loss. This is a story of mystery. This is a story of rebirth and renovation. Numbers. Numbers are important in a book like this. 400,000. That's how many books were destroyed by the fire. Another 700,000 were actually damaged by the fire. But what is amazing is that another number, 1,700. That's how many volunteers showed up within days to help take all of those damaged books. They packaged them so they could be freeze-dried because that was one of the methods by which the books could be repaired. And there are copies of books within that library that still exhibit some of the damage from the fire, but were salvageable enough because of their importance or perhaps the value of the book to the collection. So it's an interesting story of artifacts of 7 years that it went from the time of the fire to the time that the library reopened. It's a real personal story, and I know that somebody last week made a comment, which I completely appreciate, about cheerful and hopeful books, because, I do read serious things sometimes. I watch a lot of silly TV, but I get it. Sometimes you want to read something that'll make you laugh out loud. David Sedaris is one of those people that makes me laugh out loud through reading. But one of the things that I really appreciated about this book is that it's all about rebirth, renewal, hope, and the fact that on the end of a difficult period of time, when people come together, great things happen, and things can be better. The library was renovated. It was built to specifications that will make it safer, better for the public. Here's your 50-cent word of the day. I learned that apparently the fire that happened in the Los Angeles Public Library was something called a stoichiometric fire. Otherwise, it was a perfect fire in which the fire completely burned all the fuel that it had. That had a lot to do with the fact that, unfortunately, the way the library was constructed, it was a perfect way for oxygen to be fed to a fire and for fire to move through the collection at a rate that it took 7 hours for the LA Fire Department to put the fire out. And actually, another fire started days later. So it's a really interesting book, but it is definitely a book that made me feel good in the end. A lot of us are working from home, doing what we can to provide you service. One of my things I love about nonfiction is how we get from point A to point B in a story. I've set up my home office and studio, so to speak, in the bedroom that I grew up in as a child. I'm in my childhood home, and this is a room where I dreamed many dreams because I read many wonderful books. And the library is the thing that saved me, that taught me how to be who I am, and who taught me to dream. And so here in this book talking to you folks. And one of my favorite things I'd like to remind you all is that, what is the library? I'm a library consultant, for lack of a better word, a woman named Joan Fry Williams. I saw her speak once, and she asked many librarians, what do libraries do? And of course, there are many answers. Teach children to read, provide literature. All of these answers were correct. Provide programming, get taxes done. Everything everybody said was yes, indeed. And then she summed it up into a nice little package. She said, libraries and librarians help people climb Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if you're not familiar with that hierarchy of needs, Everybody needs food and shelter. Everybody needs a job. And eventually you get to the top of the hierarchy of needs, if we're fortunate, where we get to be who we want to be in the best way possible. And what she said is that libraries help everybody get there. But for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years, our number one technology was the book. We have computers, we have ebooks, audiobooks, but in the end, it's all about this connection through this little thing called the book from one person to the next that makes libraries awesome. So I'm wrapping up here because I think I've already had a lot to say, but I would like to read something to you. I'll see if I can get it right. I like to think that libraries, like restaurants and other services, are a lot like theater. What you experience and what you see out front is meant for you and is the best we have to offer. And if you're interested in what goes on backstage or behind the doors or in the kitchen, that's awesome. But you shouldn't have to worry about it because we want to deliver the best to you at your doorstep, at your fingertips, at your tabletop. But a lot happens before we get there. And so, talking about the start of the day at the Los Angeles Public Library, this is what Susan Orlean wrote. A puff of outside air wafted into the entryway. Then in an instant, people poured in. The hoverers who bolted from their posts in the garden, the wall-sitters, the morning fumblers, the school groups, and the business people. And the parents with strollers heading to story time, and the students and the homeless who rushed straight to the bathrooms and then to the computer center. The people were all clamoring for Dictionary of Irish Artists, the hero with 1,000 faces, Harry Potter, always Harry Potter. They were a rivering flow of humanity, a gush. They were looking for baby name guides and biographies and maps of Indiana and suggestions from the library for a novel that was romantic, but not too corny. They were sitting in the library just because it was a pleasant place to sit, and sometimes they were doing things that had nothing to do with the library. On this particular morning in social sciences, a woman at the reading tables was sewing beads under the sleeve of a cotton blouse. In one of the carols in the history department, a man in a pinstriped suit who had books on his desk but wasn't reading held a bag of Doritos under the lip of the table. He pretended to muffle a cough each time he ate a chip. We are all looking forward to that morning routine where the library turns in to what you need and what you love, and we look forward to seeing you there at the library. So thanks, folks. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon. Bye, everybody. And remember, one more time, the library book, Susan Orlean, it's available in Overdrive. You can get a digital library card if you need one. Just go to our website, SJCPLS.org. If you need help, just contact us. Ask a Librarian, emails, Facebook. You will get the help you need, and it'll be our pleasure to provide it. Take care, everybody.